The ice cracked beneath Jack Walsh's boots like a gunshot, and for a split second, he wondered if saving a drowning dog was worth leaving his 7-year-old daughter without a father. But his body was already moving, crawling flat across the frozen surface of Miller's Lake, distributing his weight as evenly as possible while the terrified golden retriever thrashed in the black water 20 feet ahead. "Dad, be careful." Emma's voice carried across the winter air from the shore where he'd ordered her to stay, and Jack could hear the fear threading through her words. It was the same fear she'd had in her voice 2 years ago when her mother had walked out on them both, announcing she couldn't handle the stress of being poor anymore. Jack pushed the memory aside and focused on the dog, whose struggles were becoming weaker with each passing second. "I've got this, sweetheart," Jack called back, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. The December cold bit through his threadbare jacket, but he barely felt it as he inched forward. He'd survived 2 tours overseas and worked 3 jobs to keep Emma fed and clothed. He could handle a frozen lake. Behind him on the shore, a woman's voice rang out, high and desperate. "Please, someone help him. Winston, hold on." Jack didn't turn to look. He couldn't afford the distraction. The ice groaned beneath him, a low warning that made his stomach drop, but he was close enough now to see the dog's brown eyes, wide with panic and exhaustion. Jack extended his arm as far as it would reach, his fingers stretching toward the soaked fur. "Come on, buddy," Jack murmured, keeping his voice calm even as adrenaline surged through his system. "Just a little closer." The dog paddled weakly toward him, and Jack's fingers closed around his collar. The relief lasted exactly 2 seconds before he heard the sharp crack directly beneath his chest. The ice gave way, and Jack plunged into water so cold, it felt like 1,000 knives stabbing into his skin simultaneously. His muscles seized, and for a terrifying moment, he couldn't remember how to make his arms and legs work. But the dog was right there, and Jack's survival instincts kicked in harder than the shock. He grabbed Winston with both arms, holding the retriever against his chest as he kicked toward the edge of the hole. The ice kept breaking under his attempts to pull himself up, chunks the size of dinner plates separating from the main sheet. "Dad." Emma's scream cut through everything, bringing Jack's world into sharp focus. He couldn't die here. He wouldn't leave his little girl alone. Jack smashed his elbow down on the ice ahead of him, testing it, and found a section that held. He shoved Winston up onto the solid surface, and the dog scrambled away toward shore. Good. Now Jack just had to save himself. His clothes were lead weights dragging him down, and his fingers were already going numb. He hauled himself up with strength he didn't know he still possessed, rolling onto the ice and immediately flattening himself into a spread eagle position. The crawl back to shore was the longest journey of Jack's life. Every movement was careful, calculated, even though his body was screaming at him to run. The woman who'd been calling for her dog was now shouting instructions about distributing his weight, and someone else was calling 911. But Jack tuned it all out except for Emma's voice, guiding him home like a lighthouse in a storm. "You're almost here, Dad. Just a little more." "You can do it." When his boots finally touched solid ground, 3 people grabbed him and pulled him the rest of the way. Jack collapsed onto the muddy shore, his entire body shaking so violently his teeth clattered together. Someone threw a coat over him, then another. Emma was suddenly there, her small arms wrapping around his neck, and Jack held her as tight as his frozen limbs would allow. "I'm okay, Princess," he managed through chattering teeth. "I'm okay." "You're insane," a woman's voice said, and Jack looked up to see the dog's owner kneeling beside him. She was beautiful even through his blurred vision, with long dark hair escaping from beneath a cream-colored hat and eyes the color of honey that were currently filled with tears. "That was the bravest and most reckless thing I've ever seen." "Had to," Jack said simply. "He needed help." The woman stripped off her own coat, an expensive-looking wool number that probably cost more than Jack's monthly rent, and added it to the pile covering him. "An ambulance is coming. "You're hypothermic. We need to get you warmed up gradually." Winston bounded over, soaking wet but very much alive, and started licking Jack's face with enthusiastic gratitude. Despite everything, Jack laughed, which made Emma giggle through her tears, which made the beautiful woman smile even as she continued crying. "I'm Madison Montgomery," the woman said, her hand hovering uncertainly like she wanted to touch him but didn't know if she should. "That ridiculous, wonderful dog is Winston, and you just saved his life at nearly the cost of your own." "Jack Walsh," he replied, then nodded toward his daughter. "This is Emma." "Thank you for saving Winston, Mr. Walsh," Madison said, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to ever repay you." "Don't need repayment," Jack said, his shivering finally starting to ease slightly with all the coats piled on him. "Just glad he's safe." The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes, and the paramedics insisted on taking Jack to the hospital, despite his protests that he couldn't afford it. Madison rode with them, holding Emma's hand in the back of the ambulance, while Jack lay on the gurney with heated blankets piled on top of him. She'd somehow gotten both Emma and the dog into the vehicle through sheer force of will, arguing with the paramedics that a 7-year-old wasn't being separated from her father, and the dog wasn't being left behind after what Jack had done for him. At the hospital, they treated Jack for mild hypothermia and kept him for observation for several hours. Madison stayed the entire time, buying Emma dinner from the cafeteria and keeping her entertained with stories about Winston's various misadventures. Jack watched them through the window in his room, his chest tight with something that had nothing to do with cold water in his lungs. Emma was laughing, really laughing, in a way she hadn't since her mother left. And Madison was looking at his daughter with genuine warmth. Not the pity Jack had grown used to seeing from people when they learned he was a single father barely keeping his head above water financially. When the doctor finally cleared Jack to leave around 9 that evening, Madison was waiting with Emma, who had fallen asleep on her lap. Winston was curled at their feet, completely dry now and looking none the worse for his adventure. "How are you feeling?" Madison asked softly, careful not to wake Emma. "Like I went swimming in a frozen lake," Jack said with a slight smile. "But I'll live, thanks for staying with her." "It was my pleasure," Madison said, and Jack could tell she meant it. She looked down at Emma's sleeping face with such tenderness that it made something in Jack's chest ache. "She's wonderful. You've done an incredible job with her." Jack felt his throat tighten. People didn't usually hand out compliments about his parenting. Most folks seemed to think a single father was inherently less capable than a mother would be. "Thank you. She's my whole world." "That's obvious," Madison said. She shifted carefully, and Jack moved to take Emma from her arms. His daughter barely stirred as he settled her against his chest. "Can I give you a ride home? I have my car here." Jack wanted to refuse on principle. He'd been handling things on his own for 2 years now, and accepting help felt like admitting defeat. But Emma was heavy in his arms. His clothes were still damp despite the hospital scrubs they'd given him, and the bus route home would take over an hour with 2 transfers. "If it's not too much trouble," Jack said finally. Madison's smile could have lit up the entire hospital. "It's absolutely no trouble at all." Her car turned out to be a sleek black Mercedes that probably cost more than Jack made in 3 years. He tried not to gawk as he settled Emma into the backseat and buckled her in, but Madison caught his expression. "It's too much car for one person and a dog," she admitted, sounding almost embarrassed. "But I like the safety features." Winston jumped into the back with Emma, curling up beside her like a furry guardian angel. Jack gave Madison his address, then spent the drive trying not to feel self-conscious about leading this woman in her expensive car to his neighborhood. It wasn't dangerous, exactly, but it definitely wasn't nice. The apartment complex he and Emma called home had seen better decades, and the parking lot was more potholes than pavement. Madison didn't react when she pulled up in front of his building, her expression remaining warm and open. "Let me help you get Emma inside." "I've got it," Jack started to protest, but Madison was already out of the car, opening the back door and gently extracting Emma from her seat. "You just spent hours in a frozen lake and a hospital," Madison said firmly. "Let me help." There was something in her tone that made Jack realize arguing would be pointless, so he led the way to his ground-floor apartment. It took him 3 tries to get the key in the lock with his hands still not quite steady, but finally, the door swung open to reveal their modest home. Jack had always kept the place clean, but seeing it through Madison's eyes made him aware of every worn piece of furniture, every spot where the carpet was threadbare, every indication that they were barely scraping by. The Christmas decorations Emma had insisted on making from construction paper were taped to the walls, cheerful and childish, and somehow making everything seem even more shabby in contrast. "Where's her room?" Madison whispered, and Jack pointed down the short hallway. Madison carried Emma like she was made of glass, and Jack pulled back his daughter's unicorn comforter so Madison could tuck her in. Emma stirred slightly, mumbling something about dogs and ice, but didn't wake. They left the door cracked open the way Emma liked it and moved back into the living room. Winston had followed them inside and was now investigating every corner of the apartment with his nose, his tail wagging contentedly. "Would you like some coffee?" Jack offered, then immediately regretted it when he remembered he was down to the cheap instant stuff that tasted like dirt. "Or water. I have water." "Coffee sounds perfect," Madison said, settling onto his sagging couch like it was fine furniture. "If you're up for it." Jack put the kettle on and tried to ignore how aware he was of Madison's presence in his small kitchen. She'd removed her hat, and her dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders. Even after hours in a hospital, she looked put together in a way Jack never managed. Her jeans probably cost more than his entire wardrobe, and her sweater was that kind of soft that only came with a hefty price tag. "I'm sorry about the coffee," Jack said as he spooned the instant crystals into 2 mugs. "It's not great." "It's warm and caffeinated," Madison replied. "That makes it perfect as far as I'm concerned." When Jack handed her the mug, their fingers brushed, and he felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with the cold he'd endured earlier. Madison's eyes met his, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the connection neither of them had expected. "You should know," Madison said slowly, wrapping both hands around the mug. "I'm not usually this forward. I don't normally insert myself into strangers' lives. But what you did today was extraordinary, Jack. You could have died saving my dog." "I couldn't just let him drown," Jack said, sitting in the worn armchair across from her because sitting beside her on the couch felt too intimate. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Madison said firmly. "They wouldn't have. There were at least a dozen people standing around that lake, and you were the only one who moved. You didn't even hesitate." Jack shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I'm a father. Hesitation isn't really in my vocabulary anymore. You see something that needs doing, you do it." "Is it just you and Emma?" Madison asked gently. "Yeah, her mother left 2 years ago, decided poverty wasn't the life she'd signed up for." Jack surprised himself with his honesty. He usually kept that particular pain close to his chest, but something about Madison made him want to open up. "Can't say I blame her entirely. Things have been tight." "That must be incredibly difficult," Madison said, and there was no pity in her voice, just understanding. "What do you do for work?" "Construction during the day, and I bartend a couple nights a week when my neighbor can watch Emma. Sometimes I pick up handyman jobs on weekends." Jack took a sip of his terrible coffee. "It's enough to keep us afloat. Barely." "And you still jumped into a frozen lake to save a dog," Madison said softly. "Like I said, I couldn't just watch him die." They talked until after midnight, the conversation flowing easily despite their obvious differences. Madison told him about her work, though she was vague about the details, saying something about business management and investments that went over Jack's head. Jack talked about Emma, about the constant juggling act of single parenthood, about the small joys that made the struggle worthwhile. When Winston finally flopped down at Madison's feet with a contented sigh, she glanced at her watch and gasped. "I can't believe how late it is. I should let you rest." Jack walked her to the door, reluctant to see her go even though exhaustion was pulling at him. "Thank you again for everything tonight. For staying with Emma for the ride home. You didn't have to do any of that." "I wanted to," Madison said simply. She pulled a business card from her purse and pressed it into his hand. "Will you call me? I'd like to take you and Emma to dinner." "To properly thank you." Jack looked down at the card. Montgomery Industries, Madison Montgomery, CO. The address was in the financial district downtown, the kind of building Jack had only ever entered through the service entrance to do repairs. "You're a CEO." Jack said, his voice coming out more strangled than he intended. Madison's cheeks flushed pink. "Is that a problem?" "No, Jack ran a hand through his hair. "You're way out of my league." "I don't think of people as having leagues," Madison said quietly. "And besides, you saved my dog's life. That makes you pretty remarkable in my book, regardless of what's in your bank account." She leaned up and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek, her lips warm against his cold skin. "Please call me Jack." Then she was gone, Winston trotting after her, and Jack was left standing in his doorway with a business card and the lingering scent of her perfume in the air. He didn't call the next day, or the day after that. Jack told himself it was because he was busy with work and taking care of Emma, but the truth was he was scared. Scared of getting involved with someone so far above his station. Scared of Emma getting attached to another woman who might leave. Scared of wanting something he couldn't have. But Emma had other ideas. "That lady with the dog was really nice," she said on the third day, pushing her macaroni and cheese around her plate at dinner. "Do you think we'll see her again?" "I don't know, Princess," Jack said carefully. "She's probably very busy." "She gave you her card, though," Emma pointed out with the irrefutable logic of a 7-year-old. "Doesn't that mean she wants you to call her?" "Eat your dinner," Jack said, which was his go-to response when Emma asked questions he didn't want to answer. But that night, after Emma was in bed, Jack found himself staring at Madison's business card. He thought about her laugh, the way she'd held Emma so gently, the warmth in her eyes when she'd looked at him. He thought about the connection he'd felt, that spark of something he hadn't experienced in years. Before he could talk himself out of it, Jack picked up his phone and dialed the number on the card. It rang 4 times, and he was about to hang up when Madison answered, slightly breathless. "Hello." "Hi, it's Jack Walsh, from the lake." "Jack," Madison's voice filled with genuine delight, and Jack felt some of his nervousness ease. "I was hoping you'd call. How are you feeling?" "Good as new. Listen, about that dinner you mentioned, Emma hasn't stopped talking about you and Winston. If the offer's still open, we'd like to take you up on it." "Really?" Madison sounded like he'd just given her the best news she'd heard in weeks. "That's wonderful. Are you free this Saturday?" They made plans to meet at a family-friendly Italian restaurant. Nothing too fancy, but nice enough that Jack would need to break out his one good shirt. When he hung up, Jack felt a mixture of excitement and terror that kept him awake for hours. Saturday arrived with Emma bouncing off the walls in excitement. She changed outfits 3 times, finally settling on her favorite dress, the blue one with flowers that was getting a bit too small, but was still her go-to for special occasions. Jack helped her brush her hair and then let her help him pick out a shirt, though she just confirmed his original choice was the right one. They arrived at the restaurant 5 minutes early to find Madison already waiting in the lobby with Winston on a leash beside her. She was wearing a simple green dress that made her eyes shine, and when she smiled at them, Jack felt his heart skip a beat. "Emma," Madison said warmly, crouching down to the girl's level. "It's so good to see you again. Winston has been asking about you." "Really?" Emma's eyes went wide with delight, and she threw her arms around the dog's neck. Winston's tail wagged so hard his entire back end wiggled. "Really?" Madison confirmed, then stood and met Jack's eyes. "Hi. Hi yourself," Jack replied, suddenly tongue-tied. Dinner was easier than Jack had expected. Madison ordered the kind of meal he'd normally never splurge on, but she did it so naturally that it didn't feel like she was showing off her wealth. She asked Emma about school, about her favorite books, about what she wanted for Christmas, and she listened to the answers like they were the most important things in the world. "I want a puppy," Emma confessed, shooting her father a hopeful look. "But Dad says we can't afford one right now." Jack felt his face heat with embarrassment, but Madison just nodded seriously. "Dogs are a big responsibility. You need to make sure you can give them everything they need to be happy and healthy." "When I'm older and can help more, maybe we can get one," Emma said, displaying a maturity that made Jack's chest swell with pride. "I think that's very wise," Madison said. She hesitated, then added, "You know, Winston could always use more friends. Maybe you and your dad could come with us to the dog park sometime. You could help me take care of him." Emma lit up like a Christmas tree. "Really? Dad, can we? If Madison's sure it's not too much trouble," Jack said, his eyes meeting Madison's across the table. "It would be my pleasure," Madison said softly, and Jack knew she wasn't just talking about the dog. After dinner, they walked through the downtown holiday displays, Emma skipping ahead with Winston while Jack and Madison followed at a slower pace. The December air was crisp but not unbearable, and the lights strung up everywhere gave the evening a magical quality. "Thank you for this," Jack said. "Emma hasn't been this happy in a long time." "What about you?" Madison asked, bumping her shoulder gently against his. "Are you happy?" Jack thought about it, really thought about it. "Yeah," he said finally. "I am." They started seeing each other regularly after that. Madison would show up at the construction site where Jack worked with coffee and sandwiches for lunch. Jack would text her funny things, Emma said, or pictures of interesting clouds. They went to the dog park every weekend, and Emma would run around with Winston until they were both exhausted and happy. Jack tried not to think too hard about what they were doing, what label might apply to their relationship. He just knew that Madison was becoming essential to his daily life, that Emma adored her, and that he felt more like himself than he had in years. A month after their first dinner, Madison invited them to her house for movie night. Jack had been curious about where she lived, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality. Her home was a modern masterpiece on the outskirts of the city, all glass and clean lines and space that seemed to go on forever. The guest bathroom was bigger than Emma's bedroom. "I know it's a lot," Madison said nervously as Jack stood in her foyer trying to process the sheer size of everything. "I inherited it from my father. Sometimes it feels too big for just me and Winston." "Sometimes," Jack said weakly. "Madison, this place is incredible." Emma was already racing through the house with Winston, her delighted laughter echoing off the high ceilings. Madison led Jack to a living room that had a screen bigger than any television he'd ever seen, and a couch that could probably seat 15 people comfortably. "Make yourself at home," Madison said, curling up on one end of the enormous couch. "Emma gets to pick the movie." They ended up watching an animated film about a princess and a frog, with Emma sandwiched between Jack and Madison and Winston sprawled across all their laps. Halfway through, Emma fell asleep with her head on Madison's shoulder, and Jack carefully lifted her into his arms. "There's a guest room down the hall," Madison whispered. "First door on the right. You can put her down there if you want." The guest room was decorated in soft blues and creams, the bed piled high with pillows. Jack tucked Emma in, and when he turned around, Madison was standing in the doorway with a soft smile on her face. They went back to the living room, but instead of sitting on opposite ends of the couch, Madison settled close to Jack, close enough that he could feel her warmth along his side. The movie played on, but Jack wasn't watching anymore. He was hyper-aware of Madison's presence, of the way her hand rested on the couch between them, palm up in invitation. "Can I ask you something?" Madison said during a quiet moment in the film. "Anything," Jack replied. "What made you jump into that lake?" Madison turned to face him fully. I've thought about it so many times, and I still can't understand how you moved so fast. You didn't even know Winston. You didn't know me. Jack considered the question. You're going to think it's stupid. Try me. I jumped because I knew I could live with dying trying to save him, but I couldn't live with not trying at all. Does that make sense? Madison's eyes shimmered with tears. Perfect sense. She leaned in slowly, giving Jack plenty of time to pull away, but he didn't want to. Her lips met his softly, tentatively, and Jack felt the kiss all the way down to his toes. It was sweet and searching and full of promise, and when they finally broke apart, Jack rested his forehead against hers. I really like you, Madison whispered. Is that okay? More than okay, Jack replied, stealing another quick kiss. I really like you too. They talked until 2 a.m, curled up together on the couch with Winston snoring at their feet. Madison told him about growing up with wealth, but without much love. About a father who'd been more interested in building his business empire than in his daughter. Jack told her about his childhood, about parents who'd loved him fiercely, but had died in a car accident when he was 20, about meeting Emma's mother and thinking they'd build something that would last. I'm scared, Jack admitted as the night wore into early morning. Emma's already attached to you. If this doesn't work out, if we're too different, we're not too different, Madison interrupted gently. We have different bank accounts, Jack. That's not the same thing as being different people. She took his hand, threading their fingers together. I know this is complicated. I know you're worried about Emma, but I promise you I'm not going anywhere. What I feel for you, for both of you, it's real. I believe you, Jack said, and he did. But there's still so much you don't know about my life. The constant stress about money, the nights when I'm working and can't be there for Emma, the fact that I can't take you to fancy restaurants or buy you nice things. I don't want fancy restaurants, Madison said firmly. I want more nights like this. I want to watch Emma play with Winston. I want to bring you terrible coffee at your job sites. I want to fall asleep next to you on this ridiculous couch. That's what I want, Jack. You and Emma, exactly as you are. Jack kissed her again, deeper this time, trying to pour all his hope and fear and affection into it. When they finally came up for air, both of them were smiling. They made it official after that. Madison became a fixture in their lives, showing up for Emma's school plays and parent-teacher conferences. She and Emma baked cookies together that were always slightly burnt, and she let Emma teach her how to play complex imaginary games that had rules only a 7-year-old could understand. Jack's friends thought he was crazy for dating a millionaire CEO, and Madison's business associates clearly thought she'd lost her mind taking up with a construction worker, but neither of them cared. What they had was real and good and worth any amount of judgment. The first real test came 3 months into their relationship when Emma got sick. It started as a simple cold, but quickly developed into pneumonia. Jack took her to the emergency room at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, his heart in his throat and his bank account already crying at what this was going to cost. Madison met them at the hospital, still in her pajamas. Winston left at home with a neighbor. She held Jack's hand while the doctors examined Emma, and she didn't flinch when the admitting staff started talking about treatment costs and insurance copays. I'll take care of it, Madison said quietly when Jack saw the preliminary bill and felt his stomach drop. No, Jack said immediately. I can handle it. Jack, you'll be paying this off for years, I said no. Jack's voice came out harder than he intended, and Madison's face fell. I'm sorry, I just can't let you do that. They sat in uncomfortable silence for a while, watching Emma sleep through the hospital room window. Finally, Madison spoke again. Is this going to be a pattern, you refusing to let me help whenever money comes up? I don't want to be someone you have to take care of, Jack said, the words tasting bitter. I don't want to be your charity case. Is that really what you think this is? Madison's voice was quiet but hurt. You think I'm with you because I pity you? No, Jack ran his hands through his hair in frustration. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be with someone who can solve all my problems with a credit card while I'm working 70-hour weeks just to keep my head above water. Do you want to know why I offered to pay? Madison asked. It's not because I think you can't handle it. It's because I care about you and Emma, and I have resources that can help, and to me, it would be cruel to watch you struggle with something I could fix easily. But if you need to handle it yourself, I understand. I just need you to understand that helping the people I love isn't me thinking less of them. Jack's head snapped up. Love? Madison's cheeks flushed. Yes, love. I'm in love with you, Jack Walsh. With your stubborn pride and your kind heart and the way you'd risk everything to save a stranger's dog. I love how you are with Emma, how you put her first in everything. I love that you make terrible instant coffee and have no idea how incredible you are. She took a shaky breath. But if you can't accept who I am, if my money is always going to be this thing between us, then I don't know how we make this work. Jack felt like he'd been punched in the chest, but in a good way, the kind that knocked all the air out of him and reset his perspective. I love you too, he said, the words tumbling out. God, Madison, I love you so much it terrifies me, and you're right, I'm being an idiot. It's just hard to adjust to not having to do everything alone. Then let me in, Madison said, taking both his hands. Not just to the good parts, but to the hard parts too. Let me be your partner in this. Jack pulled her into a tight embrace. Okay, he whispered into her hair. Okay, they compromised on the hospital bill. Jack paid what he could afford, and Madison covered the rest as what she called an early Christmas present. Emma recovered quickly once the antibiotics kicked in, and 2 days later, they brought her home with strict instructions for rest and fluids. Madison took a week off work to help, which Jack suspected was the first vacation she'd taken in years. She set up camp in Jack's small apartment, making soup and reading to Emma, and generally being a calming, steady presence that Jack hadn't realized he desperately needed. One evening, while Emma was napping and Winston was sprawled across her bed like a furry blanket, Jack found Madison in the kitchen washing dishes. You don't have to do that, Jack said, moving to take the sponge from her. I know I don't have to, Madison replied, not relinquishing her grip. I want to. Is that allowed? Jack smiled and kissed her temple. Yeah, that's allowed. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, and Jack felt something settle in his chest. This was what partnership looked like. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but standing together in a tiny kitchen doing mundane tasks because you wanted to share the load. Move in with me, Madison said suddenly, her hands still in the soapy water. Jack nearly dropped the plate he was drying. What? Move in with me, Madison repeated, turning to face him. You and Emma. I know it's fast, and I know it's a big step, but Jack, I hate going home to that big empty house knowing you're here in this tiny apartment. I hate that Emma has to share your room because there's not enough space. I hate that you work yourself to exhaustion and still barely break even. Madison, before you say no, just hear me out. Madison dried her hands on a towel, her expression earnest. I'm not asking you to quit your jobs or let me support you. I'm asking you to let me share my space because I want you in it. The house has 6 bedrooms. Emma could have her own room, a huge one, with space for all the toys and books she wants. There's a yard where she and Winston could play. You'd save money on rent, which means maybe you could cut back on the bartending and actually be home more. And selfishly, I'd get to wake up next to you every morning. Jack's mind was racing. It made logical sense. It would solve so many of their immediate problems. But it also felt like such a huge leap, like accepting charity on a massive scale. What would people think? Jack asked weakly. Who cares? Madison said with a laugh. Jack, when are you going to realize that I don't give a damn what people think? I care about you. I care about Emma. That's it. That's the only thing that matters. It's a lot for Emma to adjust to, Jack said, grasping for reasonable objections even as his heart was screaming at him to say yes. So we take it slow. We let her spend weekends there first, let her get used to it gradually. I'm not suggesting we uproot her overnight. Madison took his hands. I love you. I want to build a life with you, and I know you love me too. So why are we pretending that this is crazy when it actually makes perfect sense? Jack thought about Emma having her own room. About not worrying if they could make rent each month. About falling asleep next to Madison every night and waking up to her smile every morning. About not having to juggle 3 jobs just to survive. Okay, Jack said. Okay? Madison's face lit up with hope. Okay, let's do it. Let's move in together. Jack pulled her close, kissing her soundly. You're right. It makes sense. And I'm tired of fighting against the best thing that's ever happened to me because of my stupid pride. Madison laughed, the sound full of joy, and kissed him back. You're not going to regret this. I promise. They told Emma when she woke up from her nap, and her reaction was everything Jack could have hoped for. She squealed with delight, asked if Winston would be there too, and immediately started planning how she wanted her new room decorated. The move happened gradually over the next month. Jack and Emma spent more and more time at Madison's house until it started to feel like home. Emma flourished with the extra space, and Jack found that having a partner to share the daily responsibilities of parenting was a revelation. Madison would help with homework while Jack made dinner, or Jack would handle bath time while Madison prepped lunches for the next day. Jack kept his construction job, but quit bartending, which meant he was actually home for dinner every night. The difference it made in his stress levels was profound. He hadn't realized how exhausted he'd been, how close to burning out, until he finally had room to breathe. Madison's business associates gradually warmed up to Jack once they saw how happy she was. His friends came around too, especially once they saw that Jack hadn't lost himself in the relationship, that he was still the same guy, just with fewer worries and more smiles. The first time Jack used the phrase "our house" instead of Madison's house, she got tears in her eyes and kissed him until they were both breathless. It was the little moments that meant the most. Emma's artwork going up on the refrigerator, Jack's tools organized in the garage. Family movie nights in that ridiculous home theater. Sunday morning pancakes with everyone pitching in to help cook. 6 months after they moved in, Jack woke up on a Saturday morning to find Madison already awake, propped up on one elbow, watching him with soft eyes. Morning, Jack mumbled, still half asleep. Good morning, Madison replied, running her fingers through his hair. I have something I want to talk to you about. Jack's eyes opened fully, picking up on the serious tone. Everything okay? Everything's perfect, Madison assured him. That's actually what I want to talk about. What we've built together. Jack, I've never been happier in my entire life. Me neither, Jack said honestly, reaching up to cup her cheek. I want to make it official, Madison continued. I want to marry you. I want to adopt Emma if you'll let me. I want us to be a real family in every sense of the word. Jack's breath caught. Marriage. He'd thought about it, of course, had imagined proposing once he'd saved up enough for a decent ring. But he should have known Madison wouldn't wait for traditional timelines. Are you proposing to me? Jack asked with a grin. I am, Madison said, not looking embarrassed at all. I know it's usually the other way around, but I'm tired of waiting for perfect moments. This is perfect. You're perfect, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Yes, Jack said immediately. Yes to all of it. Marriage, adoption, the whole thing, yes. Madison's smile could have powered the entire city. She kissed him deeply, and Jack pulled her close, overwhelmed with gratitude for the chain of events that had brought them together. A frozen lake, a drowning dog, a woman who'd seen past his circumstances to the man underneath. They told Emma at breakfast, and her reaction was predictable and perfect. She screamed with excitement, asked if she could call Madison Mom, and wanted to know if this meant they'd have a wedding with cake. So much cake, Madison promised, hugging Emma tight. And you can help plan everything. Emma took her role as wedding planner very seriously. She insisted on flowers everywhere, declared that Winston needed to be part of the ceremony, and demanded that her new grandparents be invited. Jack had to gently explain that his parents had passed away, and Madison's father was gone too, which led to a somber moment before Emma declared that they'd just have to make their own family instead. The wedding was small and intimate, held in Madison's backyard with just close friends and Emma's godparents in attendance. Emma served as maid of honor in a dress she'd picked out herself, and Winston wore a bow tie that he immediately tried to eat. Madison wore a simple white dress, and Jack wore the first suit he'd ever owned that wasn't from a thrift store, a gift from Madison that he'd accepted without protest. When they exchanged vows, Jack had to stop several times to collect himself. He promised to love Madison, to be her partner in all things, to never let pride get in the way of accepting her help, and to work every day to deserve the gift of her love. Madison promised to love both him and Emma, to respect his independence while offering her support, to continue bringing him terrible coffee at work just to see him smile, and to never stop being grateful for his reckless bravery on that frozen lake. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience when Emma stepped forward and presented them with a hand-drawn picture of the three of them plus Winston, labeled "Our Family" in crayon. The adoption process started the week after the wedding. Madison had excellent lawyers who expedited everything, and 3 months later, Emma officially became Emma Montgomery Walsh. She insisted on the hyphenated name because, as she explained, "I want everyone to know I belong to both of you." Life settled into a beautiful rhythm after that. Jack continued his construction work, finding satisfaction in building things with his hands. Madison ran her company with the same dedication she'd always shown, but now she made sure to be home for dinner most nights. Emma thrived in school and started taking piano lessons, something that would have been impossible in their old life. They talked about having more children. Madison had never thought she'd be a mother, but Emma had awakened something in her. Jack wanted to give Emma siblings, to create the big, noisy family he'd always dreamed of. "Maybe we should try," Madison said one night as they lay in bed, her head on Jack's chest and his arms around her. "Try," Jack repeated, his heart rate picking up. "For a baby," Madison clarified, tilting her head to look up at him. "I'm 32, you're 34. We have the space, the resources, the love. Why not? Are you sure?" Jack asked, even though he wanted it desperately. "It's a lot of work, sleepless nights, diapers, all of that." "I'm sure," Madison said firmly. "I want to do this with you. I want to experience pregnancy and birth and all those early moments I missed with Emma. I want our family to grow." So they tried, and 3 months later, Madison tearfully showed Jack a positive pregnancy test. They told Emma together, and she was ecstatic at the prospect of being a big sister. She immediately started planning everything the baby would need and insisted on helping set up the nursery. Madison's pregnancy was textbook perfect. She glowed, complained minimally even when her feet swelled and her back ached, and talked to her growing belly constantly. Jack fell even more in love with her watching her prepare for their child. She read every parenting book she could find, asked Jack endless questions about Emma's infancy since this was all new to her, and turned one of the guest rooms into the most beautiful nursery Jack had ever seen. Emma was involved in every step, picking out clothes and toys and debating baby names. They settled on James for a boy and Julia for a girl, both starting with J to match Jack's name. Emma approved both options, though she secretly hoped for a girl. Madison went into labor 3 days before her due date. Jack called his boss to say he wouldn't be at work. Emma went to stay with her godparents, and they rushed to the hospital. Jack held Madison's hand through every contraction, coached her breathing, and told her how strong and amazing she was. 14 hours later, Julia Madison Montgomery Walsh came into the world at 7 pounds, 6 ounces, with a full head of dark hair like her mother and blue eyes that would eventually turn green like her father's. Madison cried as they placed Julia on her chest, and Jack cried watching his wife hold their daughter for the first time. "She's perfect," Madison whispered, staring down at Julia with awe. She is, Jack agreed, kissing Madison's sweaty forehead. You're both perfect. Emma met her baby sister the next day and declared herself the best big sister in the entire world. She was gentle and careful, letting Julia hold her finger and singing soft lullabies she'd learned in music class. The love in that hospital room was so thick Jack could barely breathe around it. They brought Julia home to a house full of flowers and balloons, courtesy of friends and neighbors and Madison's work colleagues. Winston sniffed the baby carefully, then seemed to appoint himself her guardian, refusing to leave her side whenever she was in his vicinity. The first few months were exhausting in the way only newborns can create. Jack had forgotten how little babies slept, how much they needed constantly. But Madison tackled motherhood with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else. And they worked as a team, trading off night feedings and diaper changes, and trying to keep Emma feeling included despite the chaos. Jack took a month off work, using savings they'd built up, and Madison worked from home as much as possible. They were tired and covered in spit-up most days, but they were happy. So incredibly happy, Emma was the most helpful 8-year-old Jack could have imagined. She'd fetch diapers, help pick out Julia's outfits, and entertain her sister with funny faces when Julia was fussy. The bond between the sisters was instantaneous and deep, and Jack would often find Emma in the nursery just watching Julia sleep with wonder on her face. I never had a sister before, Emma explained when Jack asked her about it. I never had a mom who stayed, either. Now I have both. It feels like magic. 6 months after Julia was born, when things had settled into a manageable routine, and they were all finally sleeping through the night again, Jack came home from work to find Madison had cooked dinner herself, a rarity given her admitted lack of culinary skills. What's the occasion? Jack asked, kissing her hello and peeking into the pots on the stove. Everything looked surprisingly edible. Can't I just do something nice for my husband? Madison replied, but there was a gleam in her eye that suggested more was going on. They ate as a family, Emma chattering about her day at school while Julia gummed a teething ring in her high chair. After dinner, Madison sent Emma to give Julia a bath, which was unusual enough that Jack knew something was definitely up. Okay, Spill, Jack said once they were alone. What's going on? Madison took a deep breath. I've been thinking a lot about our life, about everything we've built together, and I realized that while I love running Montgomery Industries, I don't love the hours it requires. I'm missing too much time with Julia with Emma with you. Madison, you don't have to quit your job, Jack started, but she held up a hand. I'm not quitting, I'm stepping back. I'm promoting my VP to president and transitioning to chairman of the board. It'll mean occasional meetings and big picture strategy, but the day-to-day operations will be someone else's responsibility. Madison took Jack's hands. I want to be present for our life, Jack. I want to volunteer in Emma's classroom and not miss Julia's milestones and have dinner with you every single night. The company will be fine. Better than fine, actually, but I'll never get these years back with our girls. Jack felt his eyes sting with tears. Are you sure? That company is your legacy. No, Madison said firmly. This is my legacy. You, Emma, Julia, this family we've created. Everything else is just details. Jack kissed her, trying to convey without words how much her decision meant to him. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling through tears. I love you, Jack said simply. I love you too, Madison replied. Thank you for jumping into that lake. Thank you for staying with Emma that night at the hospital, for giving me your number. For taking a chance on a guy who had nothing to offer but himself. You had everything to offer, Madison corrected. You had the biggest heart of anyone I'd ever met. You still do. Life continued to be full and rich and occasionally chaotic. Emma grew into a thoughtful, kind preteen who excelled at school and music. Julia became a toddler with her mother's determination and her father's reckless bravery, keeping them all on their toes. Winston got older and slower but remained devoted to his family, especially the girls. Jack was promoted to foreman at his construction company, a position that came with better pay and more reasonable hours. He loved his work, loved building things that would last, and he came home every day to a house full of love and laughter. Madison threw herself into motherhood and community involvement with the same passion she'd brought to business. She volunteered at Emma's school, organized fundraisers for causes she cared about, and was the mom other kids wished they had, always ready with snacks and understanding. They took family vacations, spent holidays surrounded by the family they'd built from friends and neighbors, and made a point of having date nights at least twice a month where they reconnected as a couple, not just as parents. On the 5-year anniversary of the day Jack had pulled Winston from the frozen lake, they went back to Miller's Lake as a family. It was summer now, the water sparkling under the sun, families scattered around having picnics and swimming in designated areas. "Hard to believe this is where it all started," Madison said, watching Emma and Julia play at the water's edge while Winston supervised. "Best decision I ever made," Jack replied, pulling her close, "jumping into a frozen lake." "That too, but I meant calling you." Taking a chance on something that seemed impossible. "It wasn't impossible," Madison said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "It was just us finally finding each other." Emma and Julia ran over, both soaking wet and demanding that their parents come play with them. Jack and Madison looked at each other, shared a smile, and let their daughters drag them toward the water. Winston barked happily and followed, and as Jack waded into the lake that had changed his life, holding Julia while Madison held Emma's hand, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was what he'd been willing to die for that cold December day, though he hadn't known it at the time. Not just the act of saving a life, but the opportunity to build one worth living. A life full of love and partnership and children who knew they were cherished. A life with a woman who saw him as an equal despite their differences, who valued his heart over his bank account, who'd chosen him every single day since they'd met. That night, after the girls were in bed and Winston was snoring on his dog bed, Jack and Madison sat on their back porch watching the stars come out. "I've been thinking about something," Jack said, breaking the comfortable silence. "What's that?" Madison asked, her head on his shoulder. "We should get another dog. A puppy that Emma and Julia can train together. Winston's not getting any younger, and when the time comes," Jack's voice caught. He didn't want to think about losing Winston, but he was a realist. "I want the girls to have another furry friend." "I think that's a wonderful idea," Madison said softly. "We could go to the shelter next weekend, let the girls pick one out together." "Yeah," Jack agreed. "Sounds perfect." They sat in silence for a while longer, Jack's arm around Madison's shoulders, her hand resting on his chest over his heart. "Do you ever think about that day?" Madison asked eventually. "What would have happened if you hadn't been at the lake?" "All the time," Jack admitted. "I think about all the little choices that led to that moment. If I'd decided to take Emma somewhere else that day, if you'd been at a different part of the lake, if I'd hesitated even a second longer." "I'm glad you didn't hesitate," Madison said. "I'm glad you were exactly who you are, someone who jumps first and asks questions later when someone needs help. I'm glad you were someone who stayed with my kid at a hospital for hours, even though you didn't know us. I'm glad you saw past all my baggage and stubbornness to what we could be together." Madison tilted her head up to kiss him, sweet and lingering. "Best accident of my life, Winston falling through that ice." "Best accident of mine, too," Jack agreed, "though let's not tell him that. He's already got enough of an ego." Madison laughed, the sound of it warming Jack from the inside out. This was his life now. This beautiful, impossible, perfect life that had started with a split-second decision to help a stranger's dog. He'd been so focused on survival for so long, on just making it through each day with Emma fed and housed and safe, that he'd forgotten to dream about what happiness could look like. But Madison had taught him to dream again. She'd shown him that accepting help wasn't weakness, that love didn't diminish based on income brackets, and that family was something you built together, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. Inside the house, one of the girls called out, probably Julia having a nightmare or Emma wanting water. Madison started to get up, but Jack gently pushed her back down. "I've got it," he said. "You stay here and enjoy the quiet." But Madison stood anyway, taking his hand. "We'll both go." That's what partners do. They walked into their house together, ready to comfort whichever daughter needed them, and Jack felt his heart swell with contentment. This was everything. This was enough. This was more than he'd ever thought possible. All because he'd chosen kindness over caution one frozen December day, and he'd make that same choice again in a heartbeat. Years continued to pass in a blur of school events and birthdays and holidays. Emma graduated middle school, then high school, and headed off to college with dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Inspired by her love for Winston and the parade of animals Madison and Jack had allowed the girls to foster over the years. Julia grew into a fearless 9-year-old who climbed trees and played soccer, and kept her parents constantly amazed with her energy. Winston passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 14, and the entire family mourned him deeply. They buried him in the backyard under his favorite tree and planted flowers on his grave. Emma came home from college for the funeral they held, and even grown up, she cried like a child saying goodbye to the dog who'd brought her family together. They did get another dog, actually two, both rescues that the girls had picked out together years before. Max and Ruby were mutts of indeterminate heritage, and they filled the house with chaos and love in equal measure. Jack's hair started showing gray at the temples, and Madison claimed it made him look distinguished. She had laugh lines around her eyes now, and Jack thought they made her more beautiful than ever. They'd grown older together, weathered challenges and celebrated triumphs, and their love had only deepened with time. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Madison surprised Jack with a trip back to Miller's Lake in December. Just the two of them, with the girls staying with friends for the weekend. They stood at the edge of the frozen water, bundled in warm coats, and remembered that day that had changed everything. "Think you'd still do it?" Madison asked, nodding toward the ice. "If you knew then what you know now," Jack pulled her close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "In a heartbeat, every single time, because that jump led me to you and you're the best thing that ever happened to me. Well, tied with Emma and Julia." "Tied is acceptable," Madison laughed. "I'll share the top spot with our girls." They stood there as snow began to fall, watching the lake and remembering. Jack thought about the man he'd been 10 years ago, struggling and scared and so tired of fighting alone. He thought about the woman Madison had been, successful but lonely, wondering if she'd ever find someone who loved her for who she was rather than what she had. And he thought about the family they'd become, built on a foundation of one impulsive act of kindness and nurtured by daily choices to love and support and show up for each other. "Thank you," Jack said quietly. "For what?" Madison asked, turning to look at him. "For everything. For seeing me. For loving Emma like she's your own. For Julia. For this whole beautiful life we've built. For proving that sometimes fairy tales do come true, even for poor guys who can barely make rent." "You were never poor where it counted," Madison said, reaching up to cup his cheek. "You were rich in all the ways that mattered. You just needed someone to help with the ways that didn't matter as much." "I love you," Jack said, the words as true now as they'd been the first time he'd said them. "I love you too," Madison replied. "My hero, my partner, my everything." They kissed as snow fell around them, two people who'd found each other in the most unexpected way and built something beautiful from that chance encounter. The lake lay frozen before them, peaceful and quiet, holding the memory of a desperate rescue that had become a love story. And somewhere in their warm, happy home, two girls and two dogs were waiting for them to return, ready to continue writing the next chapter of their family's story together. It was everything Jack had never known he needed, and everything Madison had never thought she'd find. It was messy and complicated and imperfect, and absolutely perfect all at once. It was love, in all its forms, built on a foundation of one man's choice to dive into freezing water to save a stranger's dog. And Jack would make that choice again and again, forever grateful for the woman on the other side of that choice, who decided he was worth taking a chance on, too. Their story wasn't just about rescue. It was about finding home in unexpected places, about building family from the ground up, about two people choosing each other every single day despite all the reasons it shouldn't work. It was about love winning, not because it was easy, but because they fought for it. And in the end, that's what made it real.